The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales. This book is great. It's written by John Shiska and Lane Smith. This book is really interesting because it falls in between two of the different eras that we learned about in class. It falls between the second golden era and the third golden era. It's kind of in that weird labyrinth in between. This book is also very interesting because it is considered postmodern. So if you're into art at all, postmodernism is really the age which most of us in this class were born into, so between the 80s and 90s. It is very erratic. It uses collage and fragments and blank pages and large letters and so like randomly capitalized words and all kinds of stuff like that, which I will put a link to me reading the whole book because it took me 20 minutes to read the whole book. So I will add a link so you guys can watch me read the whole book and see a lot of what I'm talking to you about, because it is postmodern to the T. When I was reading the articles on this specific book, there was a great article called "If You Read This Last Sentence, It Won't Tell You Anything," which is actually the last sentence of the introduction by Jack the narrator. And Deborah Stevenson wrote the article, and she's discussing how it is ironic and that it is something called self-referential, excuse me for my lack of being able to spit that out. But she also was talking about how this book actually wasn't even really made for just kids. It was made for people in the postmodern society to enjoy with their kids. So it was made for young adults between 18 and 24 so that you could enjoy the book with your kiddos. And as you can tell by a lot of the different art in here, if I just open it up to a random page, you can see the art is very weird. It's very strange. It's very out there. It's not very kid-friendly. I mean, if you were a little kid, I don't know how interested you'd be in this. I was weird. My aunt bought this for me. It was written in 1992. It means I was a year old. This was one of my favorite books. But most kids didn't like it. I remember a kid crying in my 5th grade class when my teacher read it. 5th grade, I know. But yeah, it's great. So she also talked about a lot of how this book fits into our society is if you look at cartoons. A lot of books that were written during this time period were very similar to the cartoons we were watching. Stevenson gives cartoon examples from before my era. So she talks about like when Rocky and Bullwinkle were out and when Bugs Bunny was out and stuff like that. But I personally believe this book fits more into the Ren and Stimpy or anything on Nickelodeon during the 90s because it's just that raw, kind of gross comedy. Like the book is called The Stinky Cheese Man. So it's just that really gross comedy that we all learned about. So it really fits in with our generation because it is an option for kids to still get that type of cartoon interaction, but they're getting it in a book. So they're not actually sitting there just watching and absorbing. They're actually reading and having to do the work. So it's just a really interesting book when it comes to that. I actually want to take you through now and show you a couple different pages that have to do with postmodernism and show you a few different examples of how it really is an innovator and really captures all the different audiences. So enjoy the next couple pages I'm going to show you. So the first page I want to show you is actually Jack's introduction. Right here it says, "If you read this last sentence, it won't tell you anything." And it's ironic and a good use of self-referential irony because Jack is basically saying that the sentence isn't going to tell us anything, but he's also kind of telling us that the whole book's not going to tell us anything. And Deborah Stevenson really does do a good job of going into it and discussing it a little bit more and how that one sentence really tells you how the whole book is going to go because Jack, it's all over the place. He's just all over the place. And right on the other side of this page, so we have, this is his introduction. This is the page before his introduction. he is talking about how the dedication is upside down. And he says, I know, this page is upside down. I meant to do that. Whoever looks at that dedication stuff anyhow. If you really want to read it, you can always stand on your head. And you, as the reader, we have to flip it all the way upside down to read, this book is dedicated to our close, personal, special friend, your name here. So basically, they're thanking us, the reader, and it's just another one of those little ironic things, but two pieces of irony right there next to each other. So the next thing I wanted to discuss is how this book references so many different other books from history and just pop culture in general. Sylvia Pantaleo did a great article called A Tossed Salad of Parodic Revisions. And she talks about how this book is just full of parodies and full of all kinds of crazy stuff. And mixed together, it really shows where this artist got a lot of his info and his inspiration. She discusses how the author kind of touches down on different books with words, and she says that my favorite one was when the wolf looks at Jack and tells him that he blew it, because it is actually a reference to Siska and Lane's first book, The True Story of the Three Little Pigs, which is written from the wolf's point of view. And that wolf is the same wolf as the wolf in the book. But I thought it was really interesting, some of the stuff that was hidden, such as the nod to Beetlejuice when they, I should say, because it is a male and female when it comes to this book, who wrote it, they nod to Beetlejuice by making him say Rumpelstiltskin 3 times. So Rumpelstiltskin, Rumpelstiltskin, Rumpelstiltskin. That was a nod to Beetlejuice. But the stuff that I really wanted to discuss is the photos and the pictures that they used. So the first page I want to talk about is the giant story. So in the giant story, he used all of those collages that we talked about with postmodernism, of just the ripped up pieces of paper and different type, and just, it's a mess. This is a mess. It looks crazy. But when we break it down, which, like I said, I want to break down the photo, we see nods all over the place from all kinds of different fairy tales. We have the rose from Beauty and the Beast, an old witch. We have a glass slipper from Cinderella, the magic lamp from Aladdin. I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be a nod to Pinocchio. If you ever watched Madeline, 90s kids, you know what I'm talking about. Madeline, that's her hat. And there's just a whole bunch of other ones in here. There's a black hair. There is the gingerbread man. There's just a ton. I could go on and on with this single photo. It is quite amazing what the artist did with this. And he does it in other places too, where other stuff will end up popping up in the background. So, for example, in Chicken Little, we have Chicken Little, where she was cruising around. She gets hit in the head, blink, and it's actually a number 12. And then we turn the page, and when we turn the page, we realize it's actually Jack. So, it's just funny little things like that they do a little nod to how, because Chicken Little, in the actual story, she didn't, actually, the rain was never falling, she got something dropped on her head. So, another thing I noticed about this book is they actually refer to a couple little adult humor nods that I never noticed until I read it a few times as an adult. The very first one I noticed actually was on the table of contents. It was the very, very bottom of the page, after Chicken Little and her friends got squished. So you go to the very bottom, and right here it says, "The Boy Who Cried Cow Patty." Now, that is not in the book. So all these that are on the white paper are, all of them, down to the Cheese Man. Every single one's in the book. So I decided, I'm going to flip to the back. So I flipped all the way to the back. And the very last part after the Stinky Cheese Man is when the chicken is demanding her story and wakes up the giant. And the giant eats the chicken. And so I was like, the boy who cried cow patty, what else could a cow patty be? And what else could he be crying besides cow patty? So, just one of those adult jokes that kind of pop up. That one was definitely the biggest adult joke that I found. When it comes to pop culture in the 90s, I'm sure anybody who's gone back and watched any cartoons or read any books that came out in the 90s, you started to realize that there is a lot of adult humor, and humor is a really good way for us to learn and for us to kind of grasp concepts and stuff. But a lot of times these artists will add adult humor into these shows that are meant for kids, like SpongeBob or Rocko's Modern Life. If you didn't know, Rocko in Rocko's Modern Life, his job was a sex telephone operator, and I didn't realize that until I was like 24. And it's just true that they do that. But they do it, and it's really so that the adult gets a little bit more enjoyment of watching the show with these children, but at the same time, it makes it so learning is easier, so you're kind of grasping a little bit and giggling while you're learning, because, laughter really does help you learn after all. So it's interesting that all these little nods to adult humor are in here, especially since most of the time when we are having kids watch TV or read books or whatever it is, it has some kind of function to teach the kid, the child, something, some kind of life lesson. When it comes to the Stinky Cheese Man, it's kind of ironic because every single story in here, every single story is a parody of another story that we've read when we were growing up. And all the original stories tell us some kind of meaning, something that we were supposed to be doing. Like Rumpelstiltskin. We're not supposed to talk to strangers, right? And because of that, like in the original, she talks to him, she gets herself in trouble, she loses her firstborn, all this stuff. In this book, which I'm trying to find the page right now, probably not going to be able to, but in this book with Cinderella, she doesn't talk to him. And because of it, she doesn't end up going to the ball, which is not the Cinderella any of us know and remember. So it is just one of those interesting things where she actually missed out by not taking someone else's help. So it's weird how some of these lessons that the original books were supposed to teach us might be teaching kids something a little bit differently than we had expected. The other one that I thought was really interesting was the really ugly duckling. In our society now, it's 2018, almost 2019, we have a lot of this like fat shaming and body shaming and all these different things that are like just bombarding the world. And it's just interesting because I learned as a kid, I don't know, maybe it was from this book, maybe it was just from my family, that not everybody is going to be physically gorgeous, that you can be pretty inside and that's what it counts. And so I thought it was interesting that the version of the ugly duckling in this book is actually just saying that the duck just was ugly. He was just an ugly duck. But maybe he was a good duck. Maybe he was a cool duck. So I just thought it was really interesting how they kind of did a twist on that. The Stinky Cheese Man is really an interesting book in history. It is one of those tales that really was a crossover for a lot of artists, especially considering it's postmodern. It allowed for people to make books that weren't just about teaching kids lessons, but about having fun and making kind of a joke about some of those lessons that we learned, that some of them might be a little bit dated. It is a very interesting book, especially since there is no character development, really. And the timeline isn't necessarily linear. Jack, the narrator, is talking and part of some of the other characters' stories. However, he's not necessarily always with those same characters, like on the same timeline. So it definitely is an interesting book. And the purpose of it, I really think, is just to make kids giggle and to just be lighthearted. It isn't meant to be heavy like a lot of other fairy tales of times before. So it definitely was an interesting book to read, and I hope you enjoyed learning about it. Thanks so much for watching.